Hey, Max, good to see you, man.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. How's the weather out there near Boston?
It's rainy.
Oh, man,
A little rainy. Been cool for April, but it's all right though.
it's about 82 degrees outside here.
Oh, nice.
It's pretty amazing, and I'm pretty sure that from my experience today setting this up and realizing how less complicated it really needs to be than what I've been thinking in the past, that the kind of audience that I'm hoping to attract are the kind of people who want to say, hey, the world's not really as screwed up as they say on the 6 o'clock news. It's
Oh
going,
yeah, no, it's not. It's never as bad as what you're gonna hear.
yeah. So you said you were been busy. You got gigs. What's your role in the gig economy?
Oh, I play on bass guitar. I write my own music, but I actually play in a lot of cover acts to make money. So yeah,
So
so
you
a lot of
go,
work.
you play around the Indian casinos and stuff. Do you go to those?
I actually haven't, but I may be picking up some shows like that. We'll see in the future. But
There,
right now, we play a lot of more like bars and clubs, restaurants, Japanese restaurants. We do and stuff. The teppanyaki joints where they, have live music and stuff. So it's a lot of fun. Been doing it for a long time. So
yeah, that's pretty neat. So do you ever like record your own stuff?
oh yeah, yep, yeah. Recorded and released my own stuff. Been recording since I mean, I started out playing original music and got into the covers more around the age of 30, just for something to do because I like to perform also other than write. So, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I was in a bunch of original bands, some bands that had a chance of possibly going somewhere, but you know how that is, like the lottery. Yeah, but I've always written all
Well,
throughout.
so you've stayed kind of in the creative mode since your childhood, basically, huh?
Yes, that's definitely something that's been with me. I've had a lot of interesting experiences from an early age, and music has been with me from an early age, and wanting to perform and stuff like that and be creative. I don't know if it necessarily came from my parents or anyone in particular. I've thought about that, the origins and how I'm a big believer that there is no real me here. Everything is just the conglomerate of everything that's ever happened to me and everything I've ever read and everything I've ever learned. And I can maybe pick and choose a little bit, but at the same time, it's all influential. So sometimes you look for large influences and, um, I don't know. It just seemed like it was like I was just, everyone's kind of has a sort of path or route through here, it seems. And mine was weird experiences and music, something like that. But
What kind of weird experiences?
all sorts of things. A lot of it I get into more later on my own, but from an early, I have sleep paralysis. I don't really have it much anymore. It's still a condition that I live with, I guess. But when I was younger, I had that. I had waking hallucinations. And it really blurred the line between reality and everything. But it set up a lot of things later in life. Sleep paralysis can be used for different things, and but I had other experiences. We did weird stuff with Ouija boards, but it got really strange. Like when physical reality starts to act in ways it shouldn't, you know. Like yeah, it's you kind of question things. So, but I've had a number of things like that. I've also had predictive dreams where I've predicted exact scenarios before they've happened. And I've done that a few times. It's always random. It's like nothing important or anything. It's always like, but very, very specific. And I have witnesses too. It's people who've actually heard the prediction before the event happened, and then it happened. So, um, yeah. So there's been this ongoing. Hey, maybe everything isn't exactly what it looks like here. Maybe there's something else than other than you've been told,
Maybe
and that's
there's more.
on me in. Yeah.
Maybe there's more. That's really cool. Well, see, I uh, I wrote poetry in high school, pretty much secretly. It wasn't really cool to write poetry when I was in high school,
Mm.
but I wrote like crazy when I was in Vietnam. I had a kind of job that let me do that. um, which was weird, rare. But when I came home, um, you know, crazy stuff happened that are not appropriate for today to talk about. But what it ended up was I ended up stopping all creative stuff. I stopped drawing. I stopped writing. I stopped smoking dope. I stopped drinking.
Mm,
Stopped everything. Became a real, genuine evangelical Christian whose only career path seemed to be, you grow up and be a preacher. And man, I didn't want to be a preacher. I,
mm,
I actually prayed one time, said, God, is there any room in your kingdom for a poet?
yeah.
And I got an answer. He said, yeah, that's it. Just yeah. I said, really? I said, was there ever, is what I said. And the answer that I clearly got back was still is. And so a couple of years ago, when somebody challenged me with that thing, I was 68 years old.
Mm,
And synchronistically wise, that was about the same age that C.G. Jung was when he, did his final flip out. And have you read any of his stuff, like especially his old age stuff?
not as much of the older stuff, but I am a big, yeah, fan.
That,
I've studied psychology informally for the last 20 years, so of course Young is,
yeah,
is definitely someone I've. But yeah, I do tend towards his style. Um, with the more interpretation and going into dreams more and psychotherapy and all that stuff, and really, understanding symbolism and how it all works and how what it means to you, like that's all resonated with me. So.
yeah. I have gotten to the point where I'm just beginning to be ready to talk about it. Just beginning to be ready to bump into people like you and say, yeah, I know what a synchronicity is. I've been keeping track of those things. They kind of weird how, man, if you're expecting things to go well, things generally do go well. And
Mm,
the opposite is absolutely the truth. If you expect you're going to bomb, you bomb. And something to do with these archetypical ideas that we paint them with images. I think we paint them with images we gather as we're children. I'm watching my grandchildren now watching Pokemon. And I'm saying, what kind of dreams are they going to have as they're going through adolescence? What are the monsters going to be under their bed when they're thinking this game that they're playing is about taming monsters?
mm,
It's about having your own monster that works for you and he can defend anything. It's like, wow, we didn't have we didn't have cartoons like that. We had Mighty Mouse. You couldn't be Mighty Mouse. You could just kind of worship Mighty Mouse. But in
mm,
Pokemon, you can have the stinking Pokemon card, man. You can be the guy.
mm.
And it's weird. 7-year-old kids explaining things that are about, you know, they're talking about jumping through dimensional portals like they understand what they're talking about. So
Well, yeah, that's amazing. And I know one thing you talked about was the idea of change and stuff. One of the interesting things, if you look at especially history in the last few hundred years into now, is how it seems we're heading from physical to mental in some way. We've everything is now in computers and everything like that, but it also people don't they still do physical things, but like you like it's hard to explain, but you know what I'm saying. It's like I haven't really thought it out too much, but you can see that like.
right, Rupert Sheldrake just put out a book where he called sports the American yoga.
Mhm,
And I heard him explain it, and he was explaining, like in terms of extreme sports, uh, guys that do crazy things on skateboards and BMX bikes and water skis and snow skis and stuff. The state of mind that they have to be in to just believe that they can do some of the stuff that they do.
mhm,
He's looking at it as like this is just them entering into another realm of possibility. that, if you don't enter into that realm of possibility, you are not going to do that, 460 or whatever they do on a half pipe these days.
Yeah.
And his explanation of it is like, it's like these kinds of spiritual practices, our subconscious will figure out a way to get us in the zone one way or another. With some of us, it might be drugs. I hear a lot of guys talking about ayahuasca and how that was their breakthrough and things like that. But it's different for a lot of people. But it comes to the place where it's beyond just mental, because you're no longer really attributing it to the chunk of meat between your ears, but you're saying this is as if we are getting communication from outside of us that is directing our steps in a way,
Hmm.
giving us options we didn't know we had. And part of the erasure process that I think has to go on in arguments with guys like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and that Richard Dawkins guy is what they define God as and what I define God as are two completely different things. But when they get down to talking about faith, we're actually talking about the same stuff. They're
Hmm.
just arguing about where you put your faith. But it's still something we come out of the womb with the ability to believe in impossible things.
Yeah.
We have that.
I believe I was speaking on this a week or so ago to my girlfriend actually, and I had this pop in my head, and I said, when if you look at one thing, a lot of the trouble we're in, especially in America right now, there's a lot of things that just we're encumbered by words and legally everything's legal, all this other stuff and everything, and it's just contracts, and no one reads half the stuff anyway. But that's kind of how you can kind of start to sort of take control over people in certain ways. Anyway, if you want to know, like, so the idea is this: when they choose what goes in the dictionary, they look at usage. They don't go, "Hey, this is how it is, and this is how we talk." They look at how people use words, and that's why now literally has become figuratively as a definition.
Yeah,
That's been dictated by the usage, and I think that's the right way, because that's basically going, this is how life is, and we're reflecting that instead of saying this is how it should be.
exactly.
So now if you look at that and then you consider the youth is driving future language, and look at now everything is it's scaled back, LOL, RO, everything is acronyms, and you realize that the we're on the way out. There are people coming up, and then there are going to be people after them, if as long as we keep this planet in shape. But and the way language is going to change. Looking, if you want to look for a trend, it looks like it's just going to get simpler and simpler. But I think that's a good thing, because, like you said about the idea of God and stuff, even with different religions, like at some point it's the same thing, really.
Exactly.
You could easily argue it's the same thing you're talking about in any way, and it's highly subjective, thing. So yeah, it's interesting. It seems the youth understands that in
What
some natural way, and they're driving towards, we need to simplify. It's just, and that's why the word God is probably still so loaded. At some point in history, maybe we decided this was the word, at least in the Western world.
a
um
short, very short time ago, really. I mean, not long ago at all. If you, what worked for me was doing personal history. Somebody actually did a ancestry.com thing or something like that. And you get back and you start realizing that there were people like me that I'm actually related to who were involved in all these historical things that led up to now, but they were involved on the level of being the cannon fodder or the laborers. They never were the leaders, and it was never really their idea for how to create a culture. But what happened in the Western United States was Well, what happened in the United States was the caste system that had reigned in Europe since the 400s or so fell apart in America. You know, when we had the revolution, there were no aristocrats. There were people with privilege and stuff, but the difference between them and us was, from our point of view, from the laborer farmer point of view, this was an opportunity to be freer than any men had ever been before.
No.
And as the government began, the old story of Daniel Boone was that every time he could hear his neighbor's dog bark, he would move because they were just too close. And there are towns that built up around those people that exist all over the heartland of America, where the basic idea these people hold, if you get down to it, is they think they are God's chosen people. And but they're not taking it like we're the Jews and we need to. It's like, no, we're really, really blessed people. We live in a really, really blessed land, and we got to stop these people from messing it up. And stopping them from messing it up means, like, we're going to have to find some baseline where the words we say mean the same things to each of us.
Hmm.
Voltaire once said, "If you would converse with me, define your terms." That that's like the entire rule of getting along in negotiation, and the kinds of things they do when they have these peace talks and stuff. But when you actually listen to their back and forth, listen to the tapes that they made, see, these guys are the leaders of the world, and they're just selfish little boys. They're not the wise founding fathers we expected them to be. They're too they're too naked. There's no more room for kings in this world, but the people on your level and my level need to begin to act like kings.
Hmm.
We need to be those rulers of our own selves. But in 1995, I was really getting into Benjamin Franklin, and I wrote a book called The Seed of the Dream, based on his 13 steps of self improvement. And the last one was to emulate Socrates and Jesus. And that was 95, what, 20 some odd years ago. I didn't really even attempt to understand what he meant by that until the last couple of years. And I started really getting into Plato via audiobooks. Man, I thank God for audiobooks. You can just go hiking out in the woods and listen. Or, but anyway, that that idea that eventually government was going to have to be done by the governed is really, really old back there, and people don't want to govern themselves. it it takes more effort.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard work for most people.
And another thing that's coming up on us really quickly is there isn't going to be anything for people to do who never learned to do anything.
Well, that, yeah. I mean, part of it is a natural thing. I mean, the idea behind creating machines and robots to do work is so that we would have more time for leisure. So that's when the more we create and the more we're relying on things like that and production and everything like that, then it makes sense that we should have more free time, not less, which is odd that, I left a corporate career of 23 years. It's a different, it wasn't an industry, but still, it was like the whole idea becomes, it almost becomes contagious between every corporate entity where they all start, we got to do the same thing or something like that. And, and I don't know if it's just the internet age that caused that, or if this was happening before because I was younger into the 80s, in the 90s, obviously, but, and wasn't paying as much attention. But at least when I was there in the corporate atmosphere, it was just kind of like cut and do more. You do more, and then with less. I mean, you cut jobs. It was like every time a new company came in or a new management, it was always like, well, if someone would go, and then that would work be dumped on everyone else, and it just happened every time. And it gets to the point where you're like, we should be working. We have computers to take care of things that I don't have to turn on lights in every office every day or anything. Everything's under computer control or well,
Right.
and yeah. So it's just one of those things where it seems like a natural thing where we're heading towards somewhere where we have more time to go inside, and also at this point, if you look at it, we do have like all the tools that seem to want to send us into our own minds or into at least a collective unconscious in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess I lost my video. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's why I got thrown off. No, I can still hear you. It just shows your name though.
Okay, well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. The idea that this is natural brings me around to the idea that I think that what's happened is there's been a prophecy like thousands of years ago that there would come a time when knowledge would be increased and there wouldn't be any secret, the almost like all the mystical hidden stuff will be revealed. And I was always waiting for that to be like a message from God or something, but really what the internet has done is give us all access to all the accumulated information known to man.
Mm-hmm.
There are esoterical books that you could have spent your life trying to find just 20 years ago that are available on the internet for free download. Somebody scanned them and put them up there. The Google guys scanned all kinds of stuff and brought it up there. And what I'm dealing with is the idea you were talking about, how the definitions of words change. But
Mm-hmm.
but when they were written, they meant what they meant then, not what they mean now. And there are people who are interpreting the political environment based on the definitions of words now, as opposed to how words were defined back then. And
Yeah.
they're not reading. Like what I found myself doing was considering Thomas Jefferson's library, which was the heart of uh, the Library of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And the books that he read, one in particular that I had not read was Plato's Republic. And I remember being like 14 years old. I read 1984 and I was really impressed with it. It was like 1962. And I went back to the library and I asked the librarian if there were some other books like that. And she said, "Oh, yeah, that's a utopian book. You should try Plato's Republic." So I took Plato's Republic home and didn't, it wasn't 1984 for me. I read it a couple years ago and I said, "Yeah, absolutely, man. This is the model
Mm-hmm.
for European government. This is how they modeled it." And you get way toward the end of it, there is this thing, I think they call it the necessary fiction, the big lie, where you've got to convince the people that you reared up to be the guardians of the weak. You have to convince them that they were divinely called and that it is their duty to serve, not to, you know, be mean guys, but be guardians of the people. And it's an idea very different from the pirate idea. It's the same human being that's doing it, but one guy has let the pirate roll and another guy has governed his pirate and governed his monster.
Mm-hmm.
And it's starting to look to me like that's the general war between everything that's going on. This this C.G. Jung quote about men don't have ideas, ideas have men, and the ideas are very old.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas and things about how history works, and um even uncanny things, like if you've ever seen like those, or some of them, it's anyway, have you ever seen the oh, there you are. you ever seen the Back to the Future predicts 9/11 video on the internet on YouTube?
No, never have.
It's really weird because you can just see how someone can pick out things but patterns, but at the same time how they can all be loaded in one thing, and it brings up all these things like ideas of like how maybe something is collectively projected from the unconscious of like the collective or something. I don't know, in weird, odd, like, or just you know what I mean? Who really knows exactly? But the Mayans had the idea of cyclical cycles that continued on and on and on and on, and it was just and there's been ideas of that, and it's interesting because I think that is more likely than a straight line. The idea that the universe would just come into existence. I mean, you're talking in greater terms than just the world, but something would just come into existence and then die, and then that would be it, like or something. It seems well that doesn't seem. The sun goes up, the sun comes down. Like things go in circles. Things, everything goes around. So the question at that point, I had gotten involved with different weird groups of people, and at one point he claimed to know all this, and they knew a lot, all this, secret knowledge and stuff. But then there are hints at other things like organizations or these families that have been around for had power for hundreds and hundreds of years, and whether they have some knowledge that of how things go. You know what I mean? I don't know. All that stuff I think more is I tend to just kind of go on my own personal experience and then go from there. And that's what I've been very scientific in the way I've kind of just gone. I'm only gonna consider kind of what I can prove, like because I've gone off on the deep end with things, not on the deep end, but like kind of gotten really into things that are unprovable, and it's you realize you could just waste all your time doing that. So it's just kind of try to stick to, and that's been my philosophy too. And in my writing, it's very simple. It's I try to just break it down into the simplest factor, and I do believe I think that's what like I said, language is heading towards too. So I think it's necessary. I think I write poetry that isn't poetry. I think it's I always say it's not poetry because I'm not trying to be fancy with this. I'm trying to just condense something into the the easiest, simplest way I can say it, but in a way that's beautiful. It has some beauty to it or something. And I do speak poetically, and I do write things like that. I'm not completely one way, but in general, a lot of my philosophy-based writing is just trying to get these simple ideas. That's why you talk mathematically. It's an easy way to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, my thinking is I've begun to call what I write short line prose. And the reason I write that way is mostly because my attention span can handle the length of lines I write. And
Mm-hmm.
that length of line leads to the next length of line. It's not, we grew up with grammar that really had rules that were imposed upon it by paper. You couldn't waste paper. You had to cram stuff together. If you were a printer, I taught a class at a local community college, and in the room that we taught, it was a graphics class for Macintoshes, and in the room where they taught, there was a guy who taught typesetting, and he used a typesetting table like Benjamin Franklin would have used with the letters that and the leading that you would put in it and all that. And when you watch the process of how complex that was, you realize what I'm doing now is, I write with this magic electric pen, and I've got the AI that can spell check for me if I want it to, and I've kind of made bargains with spell check to leave me alone, and I've learned how to do that and move along. We have endless paper. We don't have to worry about we're going to save a bit of paper, or we're going to save a bit of ink or anything like that. And it's possible to write really long sentences and make them more clear than if you just wrote that big long line after line after line after line kind of sentence like you find in I think there's one place in the Bible where Paul wrote a sentence that's about 30 verses long. You know, they broke the sentence in 30 different places so they could get back to parts and pieces that are inside the sentence. And it was only the words in their relationship to each other that made sense. This breaking up into verses and stuff was just an effort on the part of mankind to control the data. Just
Mm.
somehow we've got to be able to classify information. You know, classify. It's a it was Aristotle's problem. You know, classify everything. Everything's got to be classified. If it's got legs, it's an animal, and then within that set of animals, it can have cloven foots, or it can have paws, or it can, you know, so and so and so. And they study, study, study. They're learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. And it's only now that we have actually had the tools to organize this information in a usable way.
Mm.
On especially at our level, you know, you're a musician. You've got tools now that can help you make your music better. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and those kinds of ideas when we stop around and say, okay, well, what was the role of storytellers in history? Why are poets even considered? We're considered sort of noble souls in our society, though we're not paid very well. You know, they don't pay poets, but they exalt them. They have a poet laureate. They've got somebody that they're proud of because they can write poems, and mostly that's a leftover from a day when these guys used to write flattering poems for the king.
Yeah.
You know, it's not they never expected having a literate lowest level of society. And they
Mm.
never expected having a literate lowest level of society that has an HD video camera in their pocket.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is a disruption of everything that built up to now, as far as men know. Uh, you know, when I was in grammar school, we used books that were maybe 50 years old. But if you had a biology book now that was 5 years old, you wouldn't be teaching your children what they know about biology these days because
Mm.
it's changing to that degree. You know, they didn't find Gobekli Tepe until 1995. I didn't hear about it until 2005, and it just blew my mind. I said, "Wow, there are so many things that people are coming back to this minimum viable population mark, this bottleneck in the population of humanity." And they've got these datas about we share a mitochondrial DNA with a single Homo sapiens sapiens woman, not with a single somebody back around the time we split off from chimps or whatever. But
Mm.
they know absolutely, truly, positively, there's no human being on the planet right now that is not mitochondrially related to a single Homo sapiens sapiens woman. Not a Lucy, not an Australopithecus, a Homo sapiens sapiens woman.
Mm.
And they don't stress that enough. You see, it doesn't matter what happened before that woman. That's where we need to start our history. What was going on in that culture? What was going on in Earth? And that's where almost all of the myths start. Before Christmas, I read aloud the book of the Hopi. It was my beginning of trying to go public. And so I put together a podcast where I read the book of the Hopi. A guy named Frank Waters put it together in 1964 from oral histories from the storytellers. And at the time in 1964, there were still Hopi storytellers who were alive in all but two or three of their clans. There were people who knew the original story that they had memorized since they were like 10 years old.
Mm.
And the Potawatomi Indians in the east they had the same cultural idea. In their culture, it was the women who were basically the recorders of any business that went on. The women would remember all of those stories, and those stories were passed on and on and on in all these cultures. And now we're at a place where we're all interacting and intersecting with each other. And, well, why did your culture have this rule for this? Why did your culture have this rule for that? What caused this? And we're beginning to get to a place where we I wouldn't go to war if somebody told me he didn't believe Jesus Christ was the Son of God. I wouldn't go to war for somebody who told me that, that those wars they had in Europe, the 30 Years Wars and things like that, they were over some really stupid ideas. I can't even imagine that the people would have believed those ideas until I stop and think about how afraid I was of hell when I was a kid.
Mm.
Because there were people around me who still really believed. I came from a Cajun Catholic family on my dad's side. People that had fled Acadia and gone down into Louisiana and lived in the swamps, basically. Hadn't
Mm.
been to church in decades, but they were Catholics to their very heart. That, life is suffering, and suffering means pain. And, that's not what suffering means. Suffering means put up with it. Pain is not a part of it. You just put up with it. 10 more.
Yeah.
Just
Stoicism is a good example of that, of
exactly.
positively using, doesn't have to be easy, but you can, the same with, any discipline like yoga or sports. When you pursue it with a discipline, it's hard work. Everything is, exercise is hard work. You can't just.
Yeah, and you've got to. I don't know. I'm at this place of rest, basically. I'm 71 years old. I'm talking to guys like you because you've got this next 30 years armed with tools that were not available to me 30 years ago. And you're able to communicate on levels that human beings have never been able to communicate on this level before.
Yeah.
They've never been able to go back and firsthand discover what their teachers learned from. That was what happened with organized education. For the reason they started it was to make people come in from the farms and work on the factories. The industrialization of education
Mm.
was what I was educated to be. I realized not all that long ago, but in conversation with other friends my age, that we were trained to be soldiers all our life. I mean, from first grade, that Pledge of Allegiance was a really serious thing, and there were no adult males in our life after World War II. I lived in a little town that was populated by leftover soldiers who had been there for training during the war, but they never left. So the population of the town like tripled after World War II. They were all Everybody was just absolutely gung ho about how you could solve the world's problems with warfare. And they were talking about, the uh, mutually assured destruction and, those kinds of ideas. To a child, it seemed like those had been adult decisions. That their adults, the grown-ups had figured this stuff out and we could trust them.
Mm.
But you get down into it and it really was just a way to make money. And the people who made money on it were like you were talking about, those families that they think have been in control for all this time. It's not really the families that have been in control, it's the institutions that they built out of their money that's been in control.
Mm.
Benjamin Franklin said the most powerful force in the world is compound interest. And I watched this documentary the other day about what led up to World War II. And the Japanese they say in the history books, they say they owed America, but they owed Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan is who they owed. And they were begging, they had a 6.9% interest rate on a loan that Rockefeller and Morgan had put together for them to rebuild Tokyo and Yokohama, I think it was, but they big earthquake. They just basically flattened the whole country. Bigger deal than Katrina by a factor of 10, just flattened them. So the way it reads in history books is that America loaned them this money. But the reality is Rockefeller and JP Morgan offered them the money. And it
Mm.
wasn't really those two men, it was the corporation that they headed. Because by then, those corporations had been given essentially citizenship status. They can do anything but vote. Corporations can donate for candidates, and they can own property, and they can go to court and sue people, but they can't vote. But other than that, the corporations have grown into these massive entities that are capable of starting wars. And they can't. There was a thing in the 60s. People were saying, "What if they had a war and nobody came?" And I think we're almost at the place where it could be that way. Last time I built a web page, I kind of tried to get out of that kind of stuff, and I had one customer left 2 years ago and needed some stuff done. I needed help. I just put out a blanket call on the internet, and the guy that answered me was a guy about 35 or so in Nigeria, in Lagos, Nigeria. And we talked like this, solve the problem. Basically, he had already written an app to solve the problem that I had for
Mm.
this hotel reservation website or something. But I got to thinking about that. In the last 15 years of my life, I've worked with people who did not work for corporations. They were self employed. I was self employed. And I've worked with people in China, in Hyderabad, in Mumbai, in Chile, in Nigeria, and now China. And that would have been absolutely impossible 20 years ago. It would have been silly to talk about being able to interact that way on that level. And some of the things that are going on, Steven Pinker's book about the better angels of our nature, that's primarily what he talks about. He says, "Hey, sure, the world appears to be going to hell in a handbasket, but if you really look at the data, everything's way better than it was just a little while ago, and it's getting better all the time."
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you think of it in the context, I like to pull back sometimes and think of it in huge contexts. But like, obviously, when people get in groups and there's another group, that brings up certain things, especially when resources are involved and everything, and then that transforms into larger groups, into countries over thousands and thousands of years, and then that turns into ideas, people using ideas, not just as another group in their research. It's just, oh, there's this idea of something that, and then there's smaller groups within the larger groups, and then they fight each other, and there's a lot of disharmony and everything. So it seems, but if you think about it, it seems like it's like the more we create groups, larger groups, there's a chance for smaller groups within the larger groups and more fracturing. With more people, more population, everything starts simpler conflicts and turns into greater conflicts. And now it's just like, are our own corporations at war with the population? You know what I mean? Like, are they even any way in our best interest? But yeah, so you would look at that and then you would go, well, where would be the point where, say, the collective, we are one, we are all brothers and sisters and everything, where would that turn to start going towards a place where we could recognize that again? And that's where I think where the internet and information age comes in, because now, like we said, um or like you were saying, you can talk to someone in China, in all these other countries and everything, and then you start, wow, that guy was really nice, he's just like me. And then
Exactly.
a lot of people understand that, but there are a lot of people that, and here's I think the key, a lot of people get tricked by ideas, and they let their ideas in people who have even hijacked ideas. Sometimes the ideas have already hijacked themselves. There's an inherent negative influence in the idea, which if you identify with this too much and think I am this idea, um, it's going to cause you to do certain things that are negative. There are also people who can take a good idea, say like God or anything, and we start to talk about some organized religions. They can take a good idea and start to twist this. And now the whole thing, the driver in this whole thing though, is language, and this is where I'm a big fan of Terence McKenna and his ideas. But there does have to seem it seems like this is heading towards something. It's too strong. Why would we evolve to the point where we spend so much on just noises, making mouth noises? You know what I mean? Like that's his whole thing. It's just making funny mouth noises. But why would evolution have this such a real language is a big deal? Because it is. It's a big deal. We use it to kill. We use it to cure. We use it to do everything. And why? What, like that's a good question. I always think I don't have any answer to it. I mean, I have ideas, but it's interesting. And I do think though, like, to go back to the original point, I think you're right. We're going in the other direction. We're starting to come together now. We're possibly a fractured collective conscious that is now reforming into something new and better. And it seems to be less physical too. It seems to be going more towards a cerebral. Who knows? I mean, things like that used to scare me, as far as like uploading minds into a computer or something to live forever or anything like that. But here's, I think, the key. I'll just do this little thing. So I used to think like this a lot, like where it would be like, don't mess with nature, like, so like they have I think in Nantucket they have a problem with the ticks, deer ticks. It's really bad, Lyme disease. And this guy has this thing and he wants to come in, and it'll basically, he adds a little gene or something to something, and it'll wipe them all out. But the whole thing is, what other problems are you causing that you didn't know? Because there could be unintended consequences. So then the whole idea was, there was this documentary I saw where they were talking about gene altering and Dolly the sheep, all that stuff and everything. Um, and everyone was like, this is immoral. It's against God's thing, God's work. And then so I watched this documentary, and they had a Chinese scientist, or it was Japanese, and they said, what do you think of people who say you shouldn't be messing with the genes and stuff like this, that this is, and he was just like, oh, and he kind of laughed and arrogantly kind of blew it off. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. But you know what? I actually changed my mind. I agree. Because here's the thing, I forgot, I was raised in a Western world, obviously, and I was raised more in Christianity. But around my late teens, I headed towards Eastern religion and Buddhism heavy, and then I basically dumped off by 20, and I was completely immersed in that for the last 20 to 25 years. Um, the, we are like, in the Eastern point of view, we are inseparable from nature. There is no going against nature. But if you have a problem with deer ticks and you need to genetically alter them, then you do it. And if it causes, then that was what was supposed to, it's all part of the whole thing. There's no separation. We have this idea that we're playing God in the West, that we're inseparable from the environment. We are something the environment is doing. It's impossible for us to go against nature, because we are nature. So if it means that, hey, we figured out how to mess with genes, you mess with them. You try not to do harm, obviously. You try to do the right things, but you mess with them. You don't shy away from that. I mean, a lot of people can be saved by possibly that Lyme disease cure. Who knows what problems it could cause, but you do it for the right reasons, and if you have the right intentions, hopefully that carries through.
Right. And if you follow the money, you know, Teflon was a good idea, but it was a horrible thing to do to humanity and the planet. You and I have got Teflon in our blood. Our children have Teflon in their blood. They found some whale dead that had 50 pounds of plastic in its stomach. We're
Well, here's one thing that most technological breakthroughs were military funded. I heard that, the
absolutely
validity of it, but it's just because the way that government grants are structured and stuff, and how the military is a big deal, the budgets. But here's the thing, though: intent. If your intent is to create something for war or a weapon, and you get good out of that, I believe there's some, what I mean? There's another side to these things. But if you intend to just, if someone was granted by just a public grant or something, and it wasn't anything military related, and they want to do good, and they did. I, you know what I mean? I hate to say like because it's unprovable, but it seems like the intent behind the drive behind things is just as important as what the end product comes out as.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's very much um, there's a Zen aspect to that. With Zen archery,
mm,
what you intend to hit. That's all you can think about is what you intend, what you're aiming at. Without the aim, you don't accomplish the act. They've got it down to this science of science in terms of knowledge, knowing that you got to have the idea, the complete idea, before you can coalesce into a functional whatever. Anything, if it's gonna work, if it's gonna live, we know now that there are just trillions and trillions of variables involved in that thing being able to live, even if it's a single cell thing. It's just, there is no more, you can't believe that life is an accident and be honest, is my opinion. Having gone through this past couple of years of asking myself, what lies do I believe? What assumptions have I made that were actually just given to me? They were cultural assumptions. And all this about definition and the word, the way that you're understanding that language is the bottom of it all. It really is the initial effort from a Christian perspective, minus all the dogma, just the stories that are there. There came a time when the men who were on the planet were following this Nimrod guy they called the Mighty Hunter. And I was trying to, why would the Bible even say this guy was called the Mighty Hunter? What's this all about? And well, if the Bible's really true and there was a pterodactyl on the ark, maybe this guy is famous for killing that pterodactyl. So I had this character kind of form in my mind who was a grandson of Shem, who was Noah's son. And Shem, um, when a goose lays an egg, and if you're there when the goose hatches, the gosling will impress on you and it'll follow you all its life as if you're its mother.
yeah.
Well, I figured dinosaurs probably did that same thing, right? So I followed a kind of a story with this character and tried to understand what would have happened if all of a sudden all the people in the world, this minimum viable population that we know existed, that some people say it was you know 50,000 or less people on the whole planet at one time, and some of those were Denisovans, and some of them were Neanderthals. My son-in-law just got his DNA checked. It came back 4% 4% Neanderthal. So we're in this world where, okay, our tongues all, we're the same kinds of critters. We're related, but the confusion of our language is what's caused all the problems between us that we can trace historically. It was because you're the barbarian. Everything you say sounds like bar 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 bar. I can't understand a word you say. I'm going to kill you. And it pretty much runs the gamut. I mean, it still goes on right now. You can find rednecks in any place where rednecks are, and you can offend them with polysyllabic words. They'll think you're making fun of them because they don't know what the words mean that you're saying, and
Yeah.
and they'll get all pissed off. Well, the guys like, oh,
Like that's the other interesting thing about language is why would words be such just an emotional trigger to cause someone to have a reaction like that?
check it out though. Let me follow
Yeah.
this. I kind of missed the from World War II on. A really big part of science itself has been learning how to express things logically in a way that was understandable by both humans and the machines that we've made. And we had to learn how to make machines turn on and off by instructions from us. You know,
Hmm.
we had to learn how to do that, make them understand words basically, make them understand concepts that we had formed. We needed to be able to get that across to machines that we had made ourselves, that really are only extensions of ourselves. They're like um, Waldos. You know, they call those things that they work on uh, viruses and bacteria and radioactive stuff. Those
Oh
gloves they
yeah.
stick to. They call them Waldos. It's a leftover from a name. Heinlein wrote a book back in the 50s called Waldo Incorporated, about a guy who invented these gloves, that then he could use those gloves to make a bigger pair of the gloves and a smaller pair of the glove and so on. So it was a game changer. It changed all the industry because you didn't need to have these big wheeled things to load ships. You could just have one guy with a pair of the gloves in an office, and he could virtually move things and do stuff. So there were those ideas about how men were going to enhance their tools, and those began to come out of science fiction initially. But those science fiction guys were geeks like Richard Feynman and uh, the guy that's the homosexual guy that got in trouble in Britain that was so smart. Not John von Neumann, but all of these guys, their linguistics, everything that they studied about linguistics. Steven Pinker, his at the heart of his what he is a linguist, and what they've been studying is exactly that. You know, how can we make our words mean exactly what we intended them to mean in the ears of everyone who can hear them? And that, because of my background, throws me back. That's what Jesus said to people when he was talking to them. He said, if you have ears that can hear, hear. If you can't hear what I'm saying, no big deal, man. But what came along, the uh, the way that the hierarchy that exists of there being masters and slaves, between those two, there are different levels of slaves, and coming down from the master, it appears like there's different levels of master, but the basic division is I tell you what to do, you do it, or else.
Hmm.
That that state of being is not the way that it would have worked prior to the confusion, prior to our tongues being confused and us not being able con- to speak with anybody. So in my mind, I was saying, well, that seems like something that could plausibly have happened because of the way languages are scattered and because of how many there were and how complicated it is to make a language, and they never found a single one that wasn't complete. It had its grammar structure, it had nouns and verbs and pronouns and modifiers and all. Every single language, the click languages down in Africa, or all kinds of Native American languages, literally 10,000 languages within the history of man that we've known of. And those are slowly being, the language of the internet is English. Even in China, the language of the internet is English. And that's never happened before. People are being, at the time when the Bible was talking about whatsoever they agree upon as it touching anything, they'll be able to do it. If every man on the planet had agreed at the time, it would have been like the population of El Cajon, California agreeing to do something and it
Hmm.
being impossible to stop them. But what they have to agree upon is the words they use and what the words mean. And those connect to stuff that you can only call spiritual. You can call it immaterial if you want, but it has something to do with breathing. It's got something to do with this in and out. I saw something a few weeks ago. They were talking that at the quantum level, the action that they observe, the vibrations that they observe at the quantum level, they say can only be described as breathing. And it's like, so we have this fairly dominant religion on the planet that has been totally distorted by all kinds of things, but at the heart of that religion is the idea that words made all of this. Words. No, nothing material. That the whatever whatever does happen in the Higgs field, however we describe it with words, we're going to have to eventually acknowledge that if there is any intentionality at all in the material world, there must have been intentionality in building the Higgs field, because
Mm,
that's where all matter arises from. That's where matter materializes in their theory. I'm pretty sure all of their clocks are wrong, that all of the things that they're measuring against are, well, that's silly. How can a mortal man that's going to live 70 years, we can't think in the terms of the time that it would be necessary just to accomplish what we can see that's been accomplished in the universe. How long would it take? And in our lifetime, in our in our post 30-year lifetime, in the past 15 years, they've discovered the universe is many, many, many times bigger than they thought it was in 2005.
mm,
These are things that are going to position guys like you and me who use words to tickle somebody's fancy, or like, here's a pretty rose, you want to
mm.
smell it?
Well,
What if we use those words to actually get in and say, there's a common lie in the zeitgeist, or there's a viral corruption in the subconscious that we all share. What if we discover words that magi once knew that will come along and help you to eliminate that, which is all Jung and all the psychoanalysts, that's only like 100-year-old discipline.
mm,
But their entire way of thinking is to use words to cause somebody to understand words and then come up with a mantra. You know, uh, that mantra's God. It's pervasive in every culture almost. There are proverbs and things that kids learn from the time they're just not even realizing that they're learning. And those things always used to be learned in a family culture that doesn't exist anymore in most cases.
mm.
So I'm glad we recorded this, because I don't know if that made sense or not. I have to listen to it again.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the biggest thing I think you were saying that I agree with is context with things. And one thing I'll say is, so I've done a lot of meditation in my life, a lot of deep meditation, and where I really started to figure some things, or at least have some insights into things, was when I did a lot of meditation in the dark under the influence of psilocybe mushrooms. So I would take magic mushrooms and go into a blindfold, and then earplugs, and go in the dark, and so there's a lot of different things that you can get from that. So you can go in with intent anyway. Those are different stories we can talk about maybe another time. But one thing I will say is that I was always aware that when you go into those things, if you're familiar with psychedelics, you're aware of this. All of a sudden, when everything starts to open up, and it's just like, oh my god, it's so much more bigger, larger than you could ever imagine. So anyway, I didn't have a lot of visual experiences in these meditation experiences, but one thing it did say to me, it would speak to me a lot, and it said, everything that man has accomplished physically, so everything we've built and created, like building structures, everything like that, that everything we've created in comparison to the size that we know of the universe, so how large the universe is and what we've actually physically created in it, that's obviously extremely small at those levels, right? It says that's the exact same ratio of what you understand about the universe. So basically, until mankind builds enough crap that we fill up the whole place, that's it. We don't like. Well, not that that would cause us to know anything, but you know what I mean. That's the ratio that we know, and you believe it when you get to those points. But at the same time, we can understand. I think like one thing I will say is that in these meditations, you can get into different awarenesses. You can bring your awareness into states of mind that I understood things far more than I could ever understand now. So, and then you come out of it. And one thing, like people that were close to me when I talked to them about these experiences, they'd say, "Well, how do you know that you understood all that? Like you were almost godlike in your understanding?" And I'd say, "Because yeah, I don't know it now." And how would you know? I go, "Because I remember."
Amen.
Like when you remember, yep, you know, like you said, you've been through experiences, you've been in Vietnam. Now you're not there now, you can't but you remember your awareness in that state, and now you're a different person. Now you're not even the same person you were back then, you know what I mean? But at the same time, your awareness is still here, and you can, so memory is a big part of it too.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing something. I can't remember what it was last night, but there was a book that was published after Jung died, and it was essentially his biography, I guess, his autobiography. And he talked a lot about um, his ideas as a child, heavy stuff that was happening to him, synchronicities, and wondering whether he was sitting on the rock or the rock was sitting on him, and getting all those kinds of things going on and on. But it made me think that I suppose it was a meditation. It was a practice of. I have this mantra that there'll always be a place to put your foot, and I think I know I came up with it in the first year after Vietnam. I used to run in the desert, stoned out of my mind, and saying to myself over and over again, there's always a place to put your foot, always a place to put your foot, always a place to put your foot. And I got to the point where I would preach that to people. And in 1969, people would, if you told somebody you knew something, all you had to do was convince them you knew it, and they would follow you and
Mhm.
do it. So I said, yeah, this is like, absolutely, this is like meditation, man. You can run through the desert, just run as fast as you can run on these little ant trails that are like about a foot wide of the softest, smoothest sand, where from ant hill to ant hill out in the desert, they had moved all the stickers and everything. These trails are probably centuries old. These ants have done it, and you could just run like crazy. But the people who didn't know about the Nat Trail they'd swing their foot into a cactus, or they'd kick a rock or something. And it was like, what I knew was that there was always a place to put my foot if I stayed on the trail. But that's not the way it went. That's not the way I preached it.
Hmm.
I preached it like there's always a place to put your foot. And that's the way I lived it. And after a few decades, I went off the edge. You know, oh, and then I had this idea that when it feels like you're falling, that's what really giant steps feel like, because there's always a place to put your foot.
Hmm.
And sort of what's happening with me right now, having a conversation with you and hoping to have more, and hoping to be able to stretch them into the depths where we're beginning to say, look at all this stuff that we have in common. Especially if you've studied anything like creative writing. I took a course from Brandon Sanderson the guy who finished Robert Jordan's cycle of, I can't remember what Robert Jordan wrote, but I used to read these big, long sci-fi epics with 10, 12 books and stuff. And Robert Jordan did a YouTube creative writing class from BYU, and he explained the hero's journey, but from a writer's perspective, not like a Joseph Campbell kind of thing and not a Jordan Peterson idea of it, but from a writer's perspective, how these tropes that exist, we can see them all around us. You know, we can see the wise king, we can see the old tyrant, we can see the hag, we can see people who fit into these basically roles in a story. And there are so many ways to tell a hero story. The stories are different, but they essentially have the same characters and the same rites of passage, the same series of trials that you have to get through and things that you get past. And my sort of goal at the end of this thing was to come to this place of rest where it was true rest. There was nothing missing, nothing broken. And I heard somebody define the Hebrew word shalom. That's what it means. We say, oh, it means peace. But shalom means nothing missing, nothing broken. Enough's enough.
Mm.
We're okay. And it's such a good idea that so few people ever think. And it comes down to all we have to do is get them to understand what one single word means. Well, when I thought I had that revelation is about the time I jumped into guys like Rupert Murdoch and Terence McKenna and find out there are words, the whole thing with mandalas that Jung did, that whole the it's almost like meditating confusion and being able to see the order in it. But what I'm getting at is that there are these archetypes and they play the same role in every language. And those stories are the things that are tying me to the ancient wisdom. It's not like the ancient wisdom. There's only one pile of wisdom, basically. You know, wisdom is a divine entity, not a character of a divine entity. She is a divine entity. When
Mm.
you're dealing with these kinds of personalities, you know, you're dealing with personalities like Satan or Jehovah or whatever, Kali, Shiva. They're they're ideas. Essentially, they're just ideas. The manifestations, the paintings, all of those things are just cultural ways of keeping those ideas alive. And the ideas are generally don't lie, don't steal. And if you do those two, you know, you're not going to kill anybody because that would be kind of like stealing their life and so on down. Just how complicated is it? And you see people, their Christianity is so complicated, it's insane. It just stumbles guys like Sam Harris. They can't figure out. I think he's still bummed out because he was thought he was going to go to hell for masturbating when he was a kid, but he can't get into this idea that there is in life there is reason to believe that life is good, and its basic outcome is going to be good. And if we're smart enough to know how to fix ticks, we were made that way. We didn't make ourselves that way. We're smart enough to fix ticks. And we were smart enough to stop using DDT. But for a while, we were smart enough to use DDT to kill mosquitoes and all
Mm.
kinds of other stuff that we killed with it. And I think if we concentrate more on what good we can do in it as individuals, that was Benjamin Franklin's thing. He said the noblest question in the world is what good can I do in it? And if you feel useless, as many people do these days, I've felt useless. You know, you can read. Hello Poetry has so many rants from people that were really depressed as they were writing it. You can just feel it as you want to give that person a hug or something. You know, you want to, oh please, you're 16 years old. It's crazy for you to even be thinking these thoughts. And they write so well that when you read their poems, you're thinking the thoughts with them. And I'm at a stage in life where that causes turmoil to me. I'm, I want to I
Yeah.
want to I want to be in this true rest state of mind, and it hurts me to think that there are people out there who are so confused, and they live in a world where they have all the access to the same answers that I found.
Mm.
Maybe
That's when
it may,
that's when you start realizing that it's like everybody is at a different place, and you have to, just like how like it seems like language is leading towards something in a greater view. It's like everybody in their own life has to get to the end of it, they have to go through certain trials and tribulations. It's like it's basically entering a duality kind of, in a way. It's like, but yeah, there's, when you witness it, it's always sad to see, but then you just like, we don't get to see a lot of times when you see something like that, if it's just in a moment, like of something someone wrote, you don't see 6 months later when the person's ecstatic, and that balances out unless you randomly catch it or keep track, you know. So we
yeah.
have to always remember that for every time someone's at their worst, they will, that, you know, I do believe in everything balances out and we'll have balance. You know, I, unfortunately, it doesn't seem that way. It seems, but I guess, you know, because there are people who really are in terrible spots and struggling, but I got to believe there's some sort of happiness they find in something on a daily basis that causes some sort of a balance. You know, like I don't know if anyone could live in just, you know, just under torture 24/7 nonstop. I think you'd die after a few weeks. I don't, you know what I mean? You have to, there has to be some respite for your.
I don't know. You hear some of the stories of people. Um, Jordan Peterson tells a story about somebody that he worked with in his clinical study when he was a young guy, and he talks about this person's life just being an absolute mess,
Mhm.
and him as a young psychologist realizing, you know, this person doesn't have psychological problems. Their life is an absolute mess. It really is. It's their life that's the mess, and the reason their life is a mess is because of the cultural milieu that they happen to be in. That uh, hillbilly elegy is getting a little good read. It's the idea that there are a lot of Americans who are from the same stock as me, and they have a reputation of being racist, redneck kind of people, but really we came over here as indentured servants. You know, we were slaves.
Mhm.
3 generations ago in my life, my own grandfather was the son of a sharecropper and continued to be a sharecropper until he was in his 30s. And that is so different. I mean, their world is so far away from my world. But I've got cousins who came back from Vietnam. We were there basically at the same time. He got an early out because he had been working on um, the Babbitt Ranch in Arizona. He was considered an agricultural worker, and they gave him an early out to get back in time for branding time. And I just touched base with him again. I hadn't spoken with him since we were 7 years old. And it's as if I were speaking to my own grandfather in terms of the life that he's lived. You know, he was a bedroll cowboy as long as you could be a bedroll cowboy. into the 1980s, this guy was still making his living on the back of a horse.
Well,
And and when I talk to him now and we get to talking about things on the level that you and I are talking about right now, there are some real basic ideas that this guy has that are just as true can be. You
mm,
know, that you if you say you're going to do a job, you do it. That's it. If you
yeah.
said you were going to do it, you're going to do it. And most of culture has something like that. There's some level of how they judge the value of a man by what he says he's going to do and does.
Mm.
So, what I'm saying I'm going to do is try to use this technology that we have available to us to take this spoken word that we're able to speak so easily and exercise the power that it has now, which is greater than the power of the written word for the first time in history since the days of the storytellers, since way, way, way back when in Greece there were philosophers who were trying to discourage the writing down of stuff because they said it would make people unable to think, make them unable to reason because their memories would be so short. So, good talking to you, man.
Yeah, definitely can. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, let's think about it. Like right now, I'm just spinning on. Well, this was a wing and a prayer, but
I mean, it went good considering, I think.
I
So,
I do too. But we
uh,
could really go into it with topics.
yeah,
You
I
know,
think that would be good because there are certain things like, I mean, I could brush up on a few things. Like you were talking, you have a good knowledge of history. That's one of my weaker suits. I have more in the personal experience field, and I'm very into religion, spirituality, nature, reality. I know a lot about science too and stuff, and philosophy and psychology. Um, but if you had wanted to talk about certain things, I could like at least familiarize myself a little bit, and just kind of go okay and get some sort of an opinion on it, or or to see where it leads me. But yeah, there are a few times I'm like I don't have a lot to add here because I'm not like I'm like I like what you're saying, but
yeah. Well, I have realized that I'm a storyteller more than a poet.
Mhm.
That what I have built up over the years is a bunch of stories. The problem is they are pointless if you don't have somebody that understands the story, somebody that can listen to the story and understand it. So you've got to come in and add in the scientific stuff. I mean, I in the past 2 years, I've taken physics courses online, MIT physics courses online. I never took physics before in my life, but there are guys out there that are explaining everything. The best teachers in the world are available to us right now, and we come back from what these best teachers have to say, and you say, well, I could tell people to go listen to what this best teacher had to say, or I could live a life that nobody will be able to judge me for the life I lived if I judge myself
Mhm.
first. If I base my life on my knowledge of good and evil, my understanding of good and evil. And then in a while, I just get really loaded sometimes and just sit on my porch and think, because we live in a state where it's illegal to grow weed.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
So it's kind of just mellow to go out there and just think. And a lot of times, where the story goes is to this from an agreed upon point in history that science and archaeology and everything else comes to this agreement point, and then follow history not just the history of wars, but the history of how we learned to farm, the history of how we learned to make metals, the history of how we learned to. And as you're looking back over the world, you find that they discovered smelting of metal almost at the same time all around the world in cultures that they think never connected with each other.
That happened with the like, well, calculus is famous with Leibniz and
Yeah,
Newton. They basically around the same those same decades were formulating it, and they couldn't have copied each other. That was work you had to do.
yeah,
What the telephone too? The guy came in a few hours after Bell or something at the patent. Like a lot of weird
yeah,
discoveries like that. It's like the discovery is going to be made. It's a matter of who's going to grab a hold of it at that time, which is similar to the way like I feel like I write a lot or write music. Keith Richards said this. He goes, the best songs, they're not written. You just kind of grab them out of somewhere out there. They're out there, and you just grab a hold of one, and and I feel like that's when you create. That's the best is when I've
absolutely.
written things, they just come out, and then you go, oh my god, that just happened. Holy cow, that's really good. And
Oh yeah,
then you don't feel like you own it. You feel like it's something else. It's a real discovery.
absolutely. And if you practice, that's been my practice now for the past for about 4 years. I just use OneNote, the Microsoft OneNote. So everything I write is in one place. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't have notebooks scattered all over in 3x5 cards everywhere. I've still got hundreds and hundreds of 3x5 cards from over the years, but I'm about to just throw them all away, write them off, and say I'm going to work with what I've captured, because that's kind of the way I look at what you're saying. It's almost like you're gone fishing, and just my whole machinery is driven by proverbs, many of which I got from Benjamin Franklin, but a lot of them came from Aesop, and then there's a whole bunch of them in the Bible and other places. But these little pithy axioms. And I thought, man, it's cool that they use that word axiom for these little short, compact metaphors that are proverbs. And they come along with ideas like when you know the truth makes you free. It doesn't make anybody else free, it makes you free.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're coming along and you say, I know faith is a good thing. I know faith has gotten me through a lot of stuff. And I see somebody like Sam Harris write a book and make a lot of money on a book that says the end of faith. And I said, that's what you think. That's your faith. And so the proverb that comes to me is be ready to give an answer to any man that questions a reason for the faith that's in you. Don't give him any of this blind faith crap. Start with this reason. In the Bible, there's a place where Isaiah said, God said, come, let us reason together. Though your sins be as scarlet, and I add in your mind, whatever you think, I think the actual word that the concept that became the concept that is sin means a disconnection from the truth. That's all it means is the disconnection. And once the connection is reestablished, it might be just one little tiny frayed wire that connects and makes that, and it's very fragile and it's easy to pull that connection apart. But as two or more are gathered in my name, he says, I'm in the midst of them. Well, every culture has got this thing is where if we put two or three minds together, we get this symbiosis that is greater in power than any individual of us was. And that just multiplies as we get into families and clans and tribes and nations, and to the point where we are right now, where the next thing after nations were these huge corporations that are basically hives of worker bees, hives of worker human beings generating stuff we don't need anymore on the most part. We've got enough of just about everything on the whole planet if we would distribute it correctly.
Mhm.
I mean, there's got to be more iron sitting in junkyards around the world than has ever been or is being dug out now. But the way the economy works, this machine that they've made for producing stuff, the industrial revolution, that that upset everything. You know, it changed culture altogether. I think that's what the internet is doing for the cerebral side of things that you're talking about. You know,
Yeah.
we're beginning to be able to think together in ways that we never could think together before.
Mhm. I really think that the problem, and I find usually find this by I look in my own life and see what the problem is in my own life, and right now it seems to have a theme. Then I look at the world and go, well, it's it might be similar, and then sometimes you find it is. But anyway, my idea lately has been, and it's I think it goes probably for a long period of history, but it's the disconnect that we're having. Is caused by moving away from the present. We move towards future or past, and then we move away from the present. This causes a disconnect. It also, I think, could be, in my mind, it could be also the cause of doing not good, or not, not doing the right thing, because, or in, like you said about your friend there, about who he said, you do what you say, right? So what's the most ultimate way of doing what you say is saying something and doing it right there, going, I'm going to do this right now. So that's very direct, right?
Or
Now,
even skipping it, just doing it. See it
yeah,
and
just without saying it, that's the best. So there you go. Yeah, there's the base. And now if you say it and do it, now we have this idea of someone who says what he does. Now we start to separate that. Now here's where the problem comes in. When it's like the weather. Here's my analogy. So the weather, you can look at the weather and go, right now it's raining, right? Where you are right now, it's warm. Now in 2 hours, it's probably still going to be damn. You know what I mean? You pretty much know what's going to happen. The weatherman pretty much knows what's going to happen in 2 hours. The next morning, pretty good idea, 90% sure what's going to happen. We can look at all these things the next afternoon. Well, we still think and as you start to expand out, 5 days in, they have no idea what the weather's going to be. So this is what I really think is what the present moment. You start to plan out life and start to look days, weeks, months down the road. What's going to happen? What am I going to do? This is the vehicle for you to go and do not the right thing, because you can go, well, I have to do this thing, but that's not for 6 months. So and then this is where thought comes in and starts to create conflict by going, well, we could, and maybe I could for my own personal benefit. And the whole idea is that when you get away from the present moment, that's when you introduce all sorts of problems. And I think that that's the same for the world. Like you said, we have plenty right now, but we just have to give, well, because the whole idea is that it's, everyone's thought is, what am I going to make? I got to make all this money because when I retire, I want to have, people are like, I hear people talk about, oh, I have no money and this and that. I have nothing, or, and then you're like, don't you have like, oh yeah, I have all these investments. No, you have a lot. Like,
yeah.
no, that's for tomorrow. Well, but you have it. It's still in your possession now. I'll have to pay taxes. Well, it doesn't matter. You have something in your possession, but people will speak as if they have nothing, but they're not living. We're not living now in the moment,
Okay, here's the deal. The simple thing. What makes those people not be living in the now is they are believing a lie that either the future or the past is more important than now.
Mhm.
And that's essentially there's some religions who call that the big lie. That is the illusion that there is anything else besides right now is the illusion.
Mhm.
And what I've begun to define as true rest when it comes together, it's trust. And you just trust that the effort that you are making not to lie, that effort, that an effort that's being made to not do something, And there are reasons that you have just built into you in your whole life why you will do that, why you will fret about this, or why you will worry about that. And I had to um, disassemble basically my reason, my own why am I doing anything? Why don't I go jump off the bridge? Somebody at Hello Poetry put up this thing by Dorothy Parker, and the last line was, I might as well live. You know, Yeah, I don't like pain. I don't like this. I might as well go ahead and live. And I passed that point that beyond living, I might as well try to bring forth some good fruit, because the ideas that we leave behind in forms that other people can digest are going to be just as valuable to them as those ideas were to us when we first digested them.
Mm.
It's not like it's our responsibility, but this new word that I bumped into that is just, I've got a love affair going with this word, Aisha, Aitia. It means both the cause and the accusation for being the cause. Like, you caused it. Yeah, yeah, it actually did. And therefore, all the blame for whatever the result was of this thing that you caused is on you. And the Greeks had a word for that, and that word was Aisha. And God, it's such a powerful word. It gets down to, I began to look at it like the two ends of the cork, and then that thing that's in between the corks. That, when they build a cork, there's an up and a down. They come in pairs, and they can be separated by, and you get that entanglement issue.
Mm.
But between them, there's information. It's there. Nobody knows. You can't see it, can't feel it, can't measure it, can't. But it's there. You know that the position of the cork here and the position of the cork here are, the information's being passed through there somewhere. And this word Aisha in English, it's got that little T with the hook in the middle of it down at the bottom. And
Mm.
I just like, it has become a game for me to play with that word. See how many places does it pop up as I'm going along and doing things and saying things where I'm actually trying to provoke someone to good works. And these days, people think that when you're trying to provoke them to good works, you're trying to program them. You're trying to feed them a line. You're trying to. So the only the only proof that you can have that you've lived a life worth living is living that life worth living.
Mm.
And sometimes you got to come along and admit, this didn't happen to me because I planned it. I ended up in just an amazing position that the VA is paying me enough money to pay the mortgage on my house every month, and I don't have to work anymore. I didn't even know I had that money available to me. I didn't even know I was qualified for money, that they had any idea they owed me anything. And a,
Mm.
and a friend came by, and I was in a real depressed, about to lose my marriage situation. And this guy came by and told my wife to take me to the VA. But anyway, the result of all that, the result of figuring out how I got to that place by believing all kinds of lies about myself, about the world I lived in, about how and why people are motivated for doing what they do, why money is important and why it's not. And I don't know how to fix it. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to come up with some suggestion for how to fix it. But I do know how to survive it and thrive. Have a lot of fun doing it. Really get to a place where you just enjoy life, absolutely enjoy it.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be hedonistic. It doesn't have to be you're always going out and playing or doing something, but uh, it does require that you have access to little things that can take your mind completely off the whole world. I think we're rolling into a time where what we've been talking about, how words words are so powerful and so effective, and we're now able to use them more easily than ever before, but we're also able to use them thoughtlessly more easily than ever before. So the whole internet is loaded with idiots, just, overflowing with idiots.
Yeah, I think that could be one of those things too. Like I was saying, everyone is in a different spot. So there's right now there's thousands and thousands of people who are learning, important lessons with how to not use words. Well, the lessons will be learned maybe. Though some people are learning the lessons now. Some people are writing things that will cause them to learn lessons down the road. But it's just the same with anything. You things happen, and then we adjust, and then the environment is forming us moment by moment by moment, and the environment is the push of everyone that came before us. So you and I, this is where we have our say. We can push the future environment by trying to control our own self and awareness and push it in a direction that's more positive. I mean,
Yeah, and
I,
we can also reach back into some of the spiritual disciplines that we both looked into. You get the ideas, and anytime now when I hear somebody say the Buddha said life is suffering, I answer them with saying Jesus said suffer it to be so now. There's no pain involved. There's just no, suffering doesn't mean. Heinlein wrote this book called Stranger in a Strange Land, and the philosophy in it in two words was waiting is. Deal with it. Just wait. You're gonna be here till you're not here, and if you want to be, you can just be as happy as you can imagine you can be if you can figure out what haps are. Haps are haps are little spiritual things. We
mm,
say there's a happening here, or this happened, perhaps, mayhaps. I had to stop and say, wait a second, I've been using this word all my life. What the hell is a hap? What is a hap? How do haps happen? And essentially, you get down into the deep, deep philosophy guys and chemical guys and stuff. They've got words down there for this state between being and not being, and what happens is a hap. It haps. It just haps. That's it. And they don't know anymore. They're the smartest guys in the world, and you get down to the very bottom, the smallest things these guys can imagine, the finest augmented eyes that we have available to us. They say when we get to the bottom, it's irreducibly complex. And this is the evolutionists using that word. 20 years ago, they just pilloried this guy named Michael Behe for saying the coagulation of our blood is irreducibly complex. And they just, you're a creationist, and they just tore him apart. But the truth is, life is irreducibly complex.
mm,
You can get it, you can reach a certain point where you think it's simple. And if you look just a little bit further, you see it is this sublime interaction of these microscopic machines and messenger devices within the cell that can, you know, open doors as if they allow things to walk through walls.
yeah.
There's all kinds of magic stuff that happens in life, but magic means that the magi have a role. Magi are able to figure this stuff out and learn it. And as we live in a world that can support poets, support musicians, support storytellers, I think that it's going to be the role of the poet and the storyteller to point out the standards that all of our weights and measures are based upon. Okay, around the world, there's this, just the idea of balance. There's this concept of balance, and there's a proverb that says the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. I thought all my life that that meant, oh, the guy that can't make up his mind is always, he's unstable in all his ways. He wants to do this, he wants to do that. No, but no, really, we are really double-minded. We have two actual functioning decision making parts in our body. They've studied this and they know that. So the most important thing for us to be able to maintain our balance, that thing which just puts us as human beings into a constant state of balance, is the fact that we walk on two legs. I mean, it's a lot harder to do that than it is to walk on four legs. It's way harder. When they started building robots to go walk around on the moon, they thought they would do Luke Skywalker
Mhm.
thingies, and immediately they threw that one out. No, that ain't gonna work.
There's
Three,
still
you know, th-
trouble with it nowadays too. They're getting better, but still
oh yeah,
not.
they're getting awesomely better because now they're trying to mimic crabs instead of trying to mimic men. They're
Mm.
trying to, because that balance factor is it can't be handled with just a little mercury switch in your brain that's going to keep you level or something. It's such a complex system of interactions that make it possible for us to take one step at a time, for us to be able to balance on our toes as we wait for our heel to reach the next place. It's really extremely complex, but you bring it into the spiritual realm and think about balancing as you're moving through the spiritual realm. If you didn't walk, or in my case, if I had never been exposed to somebody who knew about Zen walking meditation,
Mm.
that whole thought about balance would have never, I would have never got it. I would have never figured it out until I talked to my cousin HL, and he says, well, that's how you stay in the saddle, you got to be balanced. I got another friend, I'm going to do a podcast with him next week, he came back from Vietnam and rode broncs. And so he gave me this whole folder of images that he's got from himself in the 1970s riding broncs. And he goes explaining to me the position of his feet and where his spurs are going to be as soon as that horse's front foot lands and stuff. And it's like, this guy, I mean, he rode broncs scientifically. And he goes, no, everybody knows this stuff. No, everybody doesn't know this stuff, man. Not you're part of this tiny few people who are still on the planet who have done that for a living.
Mm.
You actually did it for a living. He said, and it's all just balance. That's all it is balance.
Yep.
So it's a pretty simple place for us to stop here at the balance point.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to some more. You want to do like one a month or something? We'll have a talk and we'll just talk about philosophy and stuff.
Yeah, I'm into it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, let's do that. And as we grow, if you find this particular software that I'm using right here will let me have 49 people on the screen at once.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
So
because I might have a person or two that might be interested in, yeah, have good stuff there. I have a friend who we have a lot of deep conversations, and he might be into that too. Yeah.
yeah, I've started going to poetry readings in San Diego. San Diego's about 45 miles from me. I don't like to drive down there too much.
Yeah.
But I've met some people there who are you know they could add to the conversation. They
Nice.
you find guys that have been. Have you ever been around surfers?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
A few. One of my friends right now is a surfer. He's from California, actually.
So, but
Yeah.
is he one of those kind of guys that uh, speaks of it spiritually, like meditatively, can or
Um, Andrew's more of like a goofball guy, but he's very much like a surfer. He's
But you know, well, yeah, no, this is the guy, the
but
goofball
no, I
guy.
know. I know. Like I've seen a documentary on a guy. Was it Lars? He was a famous surfer. I don't know if his name was Lars or something like that. Famous surfer or something. But yeah, he was very. I can understand that. The ocean is. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, guys my age that are still going out on, they call it dawn patrol in Encinitas. I mean, they're out there as the sun rises, and they're just sitting there on relatively calm seas for 2 or 3 hours sometimes. And man, they when you start talking about balance and you start talking about the motion of waves and how they roll, but they don't roll in circles like a wheel. They roll like a spiral,
mm,
and they roll the way. Have you ever seen that graphic of the planets going around the sun as the sun goes through the universe,
oh
and,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they're all spiraling around forward? Well, that spiral is it's just everywhere. It's all over Celtic stuff. It's all over Hopi stuff. It's all over Zuni stuff. Spirals everywhere. The swastika is a spiral.
yeah.
And so as I'm following and chasing this stuff, I realize that we can see things that no generation before us has been able to see. And if you've got somebody, like if I run into a friend who happens to know about chemistry,
Mhm.
and like, my strong suit here might be history, but this other guy, his strong suit is going to be like the cowboy guy I was telling you about. This guy knows everything there is to know about birds in the world. He's like a freaking Audubon. He
Yeah.
knows so much stuff about birds, and the kinds of conversation that you can get into when you think about what good can we really do on this planet. And my conclusion has been that we can make peace. We can actually make peace. And so I become, in my mind, my calling is to be a peacemaker, with the idea that my basic Christian background, when Jesus said it is finished, what in the wicked world was he talking about? So I went back to see what was he talking about, and he was basically talking about all the stuff that makes the world a crappy place to live in. I fixed that. You don't have to live there anymore if you don't want to. That's it. You
Mm,
can truly rest. There remains a rest for the people of God, and it's dead center of right now. It's not later, it's not earlier. If you're going to rest, you're going to rest in the moment.
mhm.
And you don't have to be a cliff climber to do it. I appreciate you, man. I'll send you an email telling you, like, maybe uh, what day is this? The ninth, so maybe in the first week of May.
Yeah, that
Good idea.
works.
And I look forward to reading some more of your poems.
Yeah, definitely. You too. Yeah, I haven't been writing that much. I've been just I joined a new band actually that I was getting ready for an audition for, and yeah, so that I'm now I have like 40 something songs to learn over the next month, and I don't but yeah, I've already got like 20 of them down. We had rehearsal the other night, but they just the thing is they change a lot of the arrangements. Like I can learn stuff like nothing. My other bands, I mean, we learn stuff never rehearsed, but these guys change a lot of things, so it's a lot to remember because I don't work with notes or anything. I just go up by memory. So, and I'm in a lot of bands. It's a lot of songs to remember. So,
Well, the differences in the way that our brains work.
mm.
My brain has never been able to do that.
Well, you know what's weird is I don't have the best memory with certain things. Like in school, that's how I struggled. I couldn't really remember very well. I don't know how I remember. Like, I mean, right now, like I pretty much know every Alice in Chains song, the rock band. I know pretty much every Rage Against the Machine song because I'm in cover bands. We do almost every song of them. I know almost 280 songs that are in regular rotation. I know another 100 or so, probably 70 songs that are in regular rotation between bands, and then odd songs. I mean, that I know on guitar. I mean, there's just but how do yeah, like I'm like, how do I remember all this stuff? I couldn't remember anything in high school and other school, you know.
Okay, left right brain. Once again, I think what it is the compensational factor that your right brain is the one that's going to deal with numbers and relationships and spatial things, which
Mm,
are like wavelengths and tones that you would hear in music and stuff. And it's basically just knows how to do that because I can whistle dozens and dozens of songs. I can't play any, but I can whistle songs that I haven't heard even since forever ago. Bec-
true. Yeah, something
because
about
there's something about music and even the word itself. Muses are spiritual things, and
mm,
the power that music has, um, it shadows words. It overwhelms. I mean, you can get a crowd doing things with music that, that it'd
you
be.
know what's funny is when we were talking mentioned about writing music earlier, it popped in my head. I didn't get to say it, but it just popped in my head again. But I wish it should be more like this, right? This is how important I think music and even language could be or something. But like when scientists like figure something out, they discover it, right? But musicians write a song and they say, "We I wrote this, I created it." No, we should be saying, "Look what I discovered. I discovered
I
this." You know,
agree. Willie
like
Nelson. Willie Nelson said, "Songs are in the air."
yeah,
That
that's what we were saying earlier. Keith Richards says they're very similar. Yeah, you just pull one out, but
yeah.
yeah, look at them as discoveries. That's an interesting thing. Yeah.
I absolutely do. If I catch a thread, I call them threads. I I try to honor that thread and follow it all the way through. So I went to this first poetry reading and they said you only had 7 minutes to read a poem and I didn't have any poems that could be read in 7 minutes. I
Mm.
realized, I've written, I mean, I appreciate people on Hello Poetry who put up with it, but some of those things when I'm writing them, I'm in a sweat.
Oh,
Man,
I can imagine. Yeah.
you say, "Wow, look where this is going." I know where this is
Well,
going. It's so much fun, but
that's what I love your writing because it's just like it's taken a journey and a travel. Yeah, and there's been a few I haven't even been able to read lately just because of time constraints with everything else going on. But I'll go back at some point. I usually
well,
always
that
check.
that's what I'm trying to do, and that's what I'm running by you. Is I'm trying to make them. I'm trying more to make them standalones. Everything that's up on Hello Poetry right now, if you read it in chronological order, it's a journey. It
Mm,
is from where I was. I was in therapy 13 months ago.
yeah.
And so I started Hello Poetry while I was in that therapy, that particular scene of therapy. And that was just the only reason I went was because somebody had told me I had Dunning-Kruger's and I was afraid they might be right. Dunning-Kruger's is some kind of psycho trip where you think you're smarter than you are.
Yeah.
And
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
and so
Yeah, I thought I looked into that at one point too because I'm like, I think I might have that. Do I? I'm like, no.
yeah, no, I went to check and so this psych reassured me that the only way I could tell was if I really started putting my stuff out. If people read it, you're okay. And I said, wow, that's a simple answer. And and it's brought me to a place right now where I didn't have much to do, but now I do. There's things that we can do. There's things that I have no idea if there is some kind of philosophical message in the music of Alice in Chains, but I hope someday you'll tell me. Talk to you later, man.
Yeah, definitely. Good to see you, Ken.
Bye bye.
Yeah.